So something as a result of rewatching Kong 76 and all that jazz, I really started getting into was while the other two remakes, well, the other two King Kongs, the original 1933 version, along with Peter Jackson's '05 remake, which, if you don't know, Kong 33 and the 2005 remake are, I cannot pick which one I like more than the other, because to me they kind of go hand in hand. I think those two movies are my favorite movies of all time, and re-watching them only confirmed as such. I just adore those two movies to no end. And that's why I started coining the term that Kong 76 is the black sheep of the three remakes. It is definitely the most different of the three movies. I'm curious to hear what any of you guys' favorite version is. I know the original, but which one do you prefer, the 76 remake or Jackson's remake? Um, but it's really interesting because Kong 76 is just stylistically and drastically different from the original. The filmmakers from the beginning, I think, from the beginning, this is something that admittedly it does keep me from liking the movie more. According to Rick Baker, which you have to kind of take what he says with a grain of salt because he did not have a good time making this movie. But according to Rick Baker, and he says this in his fantastic audio interview found on the Shout Factory disc, and he said it in other interviews as well. Kong, the filmmakers behind the 76 remake, be it Dino De Laurentiis and John Guillermin, apparently John Guillermin especially, had the mentality going into this movie that King Kong 33 was a bad movie and that they were making a good movie. And Rick Baker would always say, you'll be lucky if you made a movie half as good as the original King Kong. And I agree with Rick Baker 100%. I think that mentality, when you're remaking just about anything, especially if it's a good movie and you're trying to update it, that's a bad mentality to have. You have the mentality that, yes, you want to make the best movie that you can, but you don't want to have the mentality that that other movie is shit and stuff like that. And that's why Jackson's version shines. Peter Jackson has stated it many times. In fact, it's one of my favorite. It's why I think his movie is so good. He said my business is not to best the original King Kong. I don't want to best the original Kong. I'm not actively saying that I'm trying to best the original Kong. I'm trying to make that character live on for a new and excited generation and make the character live. And that is the right mentality to have. It's kind of, for another example out there, John Carpenter, when he remade The Thing, from The Thing from Another World, the Howard Hawks movie, he adores the Howard Hawks movie. It's one of his favorite movies. So when he got the chance to remake it and do it in his own way, in no way, shape, and form did he ever say that his version's better than the Howard Hawks version, because he adores that version of the movie. He's a big Howard Hawks guy, and I think that movie is a big reason why. King Kong '05, for being a film that is, how old is it? It's well over a decade old anyways. King Kong '06 holds up unbelievably well. Its visuals, the special effects, the CGI. It was made in 2005, 2004, 2005. And the CGI in that, and I'm not just saying that as somebody who's a fanboy, the CGI and the visuals of King Kong '05 still hold up. A lot of movies that are that reliant on the use of computer-generated imagery, and which a lot of people think there's a lot more computer-generated imagery in Kong '05 than there actually really is. A lot of Skull Island was built as miniatures and then composited into the shot in post-production with blue screen and with computers and stuff like that. And that's one reason why it holds up so well. There's such a beautiful mixture of miniature work and computer-generated imagery. That's one thing that I loved about this era of Weta Workshop, they really were able, they knew how to properly use CGI as a tool. They built so many miniatures and they knew how to shoot them so well, and then they would use CGI to enhance it, and that's what they did in King Kong and droves. But not just that, but like the dinosaurs themselves. Kong, especially. There's a couple of scenes where Kong, I'm like, holy shit, that came out in '05. Oh my god, that still holds up. Because to be clear, I hadn't seen Kong '05 since I think I was in high school. I hadn't rewatched that movie, and rewatching it recently, just I was a kid again. I mean, it was more than that too. Watching Kong '05 was like a religious experience for me again. It was re-experiencing like why I love movies, why I make movies, and stuff like that. Why I love film history as well, and it all comes flooding back to me. And watching Kong '05 isn't like a movie, or even any of the King Kong movies really, is not, well, the official King Kong movies, not like King Kong versus Godzilla and King Kong Escapes and stuff, but the three King Kong remakes, I don't those aren't movies that I can just put on as background noise. Those movies mean too much to me. If I watch them, I won't watch them again for a very, very, very long time, and then watch them again and like completely re-experience the utter magic of those movies. Now, going back to what I was talking about, how King Kong '76 is so different than the other two versions of King Kong, is that the filmmakers, particularly on that version, really wanted to make a grounded version of King Kong. Like, one of the things that John Guillermin, who I really like as a director, FYI, I really like John Guillermin. His film The Bridge at Remagen is phenomenal. That is a wonderful movie. And you can actually see some of that style come over, because that was a very action-packed movie, go over into Kong '76 in terms of its editing and cinematography. Very similar. I highly recommend you watch that movie, regardless of if you're into history or not. It's just a good movie. But he said, I don't want any dinosaurs. This has to be as realistic as possible. And he begrudgingly added the snake in there because I think it was Dino De Laurentiis who wanted the snake. And as a result, it's shot very realistically too. The jungle is all practical for the most part, with the exception of the log scene, which unfortunately the log scene is one of the weaker moments in the film. It just looks like a set because the rest of it was shot basically outdoors in Hawaii, in South America, and stuff like that. And as a result, it feels the most grounded out of all of the versions of King Kong. While the original version, they said, no, we have to shoot a lot of this on a set. We have to build this jungle. And as a result, it's one of the coolest looking jungles I've ever seen, if not the coolest looking jungle I've ever seen in a movie. The level of depth that they have in those jungles, the craftsmanship that went into designing the 33 Skull Island jungles is phenomenal. And it's also very magical. You have these dinosaurs and stuff like that. They made King Kong 33. It has a bit of a message to it, don't get me wrong, but its primary objective was to tell a cool story and to make some sort of version of escapism. That's what Marion C. Cooper was so good at transporting an audience to an entire new world. Look at his career both before and after King Kong. That's all he does. He was extremely good at it. He was extremely good at creating those ideas and letting other people flourish, creating the worlds. And that's what it did. It succeeded in droves. It really transported audiences, not just back in 1933 to an entirely new world, but when it was re-released in 1952, it was one of the biggest hits of that year, regardless of it being a re-release or not. It was just another big hit, and it transformed an entire new generation of filmmakers, it captivated them once again. That's the power of King Kong. And '05 embraces that fantasy element. It says, let's add more dinosaurs, let's add more bugs, let's make Kong feel like a king. And that's one of the biggest things that I think Kong 33 and Kong '05, especially Kong 33, have above Kong 76. Kong 76 takes the king out of King Kong because he's just there. He's just the ape himself. While in 33 and '05, especially in '05, he's constantly having to fight the V-Rexes or the T-Rexes or to just fight to survive on this island, and yet he's constantly survived. On Kong '05, they even show you that he's basically the last of his species, and yet he has survived. He's extremely lonely. He is king of that island, and that's something that I love about the 33 version and the 76 version, '05 version. So I wholeheartedly agree that the 76 Kong is the black sheep of the Kong films, highly underrated in my opinion. I agree as well. I mean, I just, you probably thought I just tore it a new one, saying that they took the king out of Kong. That's not saying it's a bad movie. I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but I really love Kong 76. I think it is a great movie. I do think it's underrated. As I said in my unboxing video, it was just really funny. But when growing up, whenever Kong 76 was on and I'd be watching it, my parents would actively leave the room. They would actively be like, I can't believe you're watching that goddamn version again, and then would just leave me to my own devices. But yet if Kong 33 was on, or even Peter Jackson's version of King Kong was on, they would join me, especially my father. He would be like, yeah, let's watch it. They just do not like Kong 76. And I can tell you why, or I can see why, I should say. I can see why a lot of people think that Kong 76 is the weakest, and I mean, I agree, it is the weakest. But I do feel it's nowhere near as bad as what a lot of people were saying. To me, the 76 Kong is my favorite movie over the original and the Peter Jackson version. Well, you're wrong, Leslie. No, I honestly, I can really understand why. There's so much good in Kong 76. There really is. And while I think the story is really flawed, I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that happens. And it wasn't until this recent reviewing of not so much the original King Kong, because that was the one that was like establishing this story, but in Kong 76 and in King Kong '05, the story is unbelievably tragic. And you get this sense, particularly in the remakes, again, because they're built off the shoulders of the original, of this impending doom. And I think both movies play with that aspect, especially when Kong starts climbing the World Trade Center and or the Empire State Building. Because in both movies, the music that is played in those scenes, John Barry's score in 76 when Kong is climbing the World Trade Center, is just so brooding and impending and tragic, and I love the strings, I love the heavy horns behind it, and it's so good. While in Peter Jackson's version, it cuts to that sweeping wide shot and you just see Kong climbing the Empire State Building. Every time I see that shot, I go, no, don't do it. I literally almost will utter no, because and I think the filmmakers played out about that, what's coming. And as a result, they play into the film. They that Kong is going to die here. And so they play with it and tug at your heartstrings every more. And there's sort of like this theme of fate. I wouldn't even so much say it's necessarily a theme, but it's like this underlying feeling of fate on every single one of these films, and it just adds to my enjoyment of the movies. And again, me saying that that's in the remakes is not necessarily meaning it's not in the original. I just mean that because of the original, they played up on this idea that you already know the story, you know what's coming, we're now going to tug at your heartstrings. That's what I mean, and I think both movies do a really great job at that. Let's see. The fact that 76 Kong is the only monster outside of the snake in the movie, I think is a great thing. I strongly disagree with you there, Leslie. And that's not me being mean or anything. I think it's a great thing because Kong is not constantly bombarded with fighting dinosaurs, and that's the focus on him on. Well, that's because part of me agrees with you, and that's one reason why I like the running time of Kong '05. I mean, that movie could have been three-hour movies like the Hobbit trilogy, and I would have been perfectly fine with it. But just because I love the world building and I love the characters and I love Kong and Skull Island itself and stuff like that. And I also like the idea how in Kong '05 they sort of inference that the only reason why Kong doesn't just wind up killing Anne is because she fought back. She stabs Kong with that necklace that she has, because it has those sharp things on it, those sharp bones on it, and actually wounds him. Because when she's swinging around and stuff like that, and he's swinging her around left and right, you see all those bones from all the people that have been sacrificed to Kong before, and how they're just dead. I think that adds to the relationship as well. And out of all of them, you can't deny that Anne is given the most to do in the '05 version, and to the benefit. I think Naomi Watts is just a phenomenal actress. I think she is my favorite Anne Darrow out of them all. If I have to give them, as much as I adore the scream, Fay Wray's scream and stuff like that. And plus, Fay Wray is just such a likable person in Kong '05. She's just so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. You can't help but fall in love with her. And in fact, I did fall in love with her growing up. I was like, I love Anne Darrow. She's just so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and that rubs off on the audience as well. And I think that's why Marion C. Cooper hired her, is because she had that level of energy. While Naomi Watts, on the other hand, is a far more sympathetic character than Anne Darrow. While Anne Darrow, bright-eyed, bushy-tail, Naomi Watts was very sympathetic, a lot more sympathetic. You have a lot more empathy towards her. And while Dwan, I never got that. I'll be being completely honest. I never got that. The biggest thing that I got out of Dwan was that she was an airhead, and she annoyed me a bit. Not so much in this recent reviewing. I still think she is an airhead. Don't get me wrong. And I think she was deliberately written to be an airhead. So that's not necessarily a complaint with the movie. I think the filmmakers generally wanted to give off that she was really naive. And that's another thing that I like about John Barry. John Barry isn't afraid to say, this scene doesn't need music, and he won't compose something for it. He's not afraid to say that. And that's one of the reasons why was one of the greatest composers of all time, is because he was willing to rein it in instead of having to say, I have to score every little tiny detail. Let's see. I haven't picked up the Shout Factory Blu-ray. Is the 3-hour cut worth it? Yes, absolutely, it is worth it. However, Philip, if you come back to this stream afterwards and listen to about, I think, like the first 10 minutes, which you weren't here for, I talked about the 3-hour cut. I'm going to do a video on it as well, going into a lot more detail about it. But basically, it feels like a rough cut to me. The scenes that were actually added to the movie, like the character stuff, I think genuinely add to the film. However, if you're expecting a lot of those, that's not the case. A lot of it is just shots with extended sequences, like shots that go on longer than they do in the theatrical cut. That's a vast majority of the new stuff in it, and as a result, it kind of feels like a rough cut. I was a little let down by it, but at the same time, looking back at what it actually is versus what I was kind of thinking it was, it makes sense why I was a little let down by it. I was expecting something a little more theatrical, when really what we got is something that feels more like a TV movie. And now that I, have seen it, I'm like, duh. It was meant to be a TV movie and stuff like that. Do watch it though. It's a new experience. I don't think it's as good as the theatrical cut by far. I think the theatrical cut is just really good on an editing and pacing standpoint. But do check it out. I do highly recommend it. Leslie, once again, glad you're joining, Leslie. The only issue I have with the '76 movie is the fact that Kong is treated somewhat as an afterthought. He is only deemed valuable when the oil is found to be useless, and I thought that wasn't cool. Again, I'm going to have to disagree with you. I think that's why I kind of like it. I mean, I don't really... Unlike Carl Denham in 33, which I think Carl Denham in 33 is overall my favorite Carl Denham, though I adore Jack Black's interpretation as well, just for very different reasons. What I liked about Wilson is he just does not give a fuck. Wilson is the clear villain of the movie, if you really look at it, which is vastly different than Kong 33. While Kong 33, Kong is the antagonistic force of the movie, and then it kind of transforms into man by the end of it. Very simply, too. It's nothing overly thought-provoking, or it just is very emotional. Kong 76, it's clear that Wilson is the antagonistic force behind it, and Kong is the issue as a result, And personally, I really like that. Like Wilson has a line. He was like, "We all must sacrifice in the name of. We're in the middle of a national emergency. We all must sacrifice for the greater good." While he's drinking scotch and stuff like that, and I kind of like that. He's just such a slimy bastard. Now, in the theatrical cut, Wilson clearly gets killed, but he wasn't supposed to have been killed. But evidently, audiences wanted him to get killed, so they just edited the sequence to make it look like Kong stepped on him. In the extended TV cut, evidently Wilson survives because Kong lifts up his foot and all you see is Wilson's hat. So somewhere out in the ether is Wilson trying to avoid all these lawsuits that are coming after him. I admittedly I do really like the scene, the extended scene where that Petrox guy was like, no matter where you go, doesn't matter where you go in the world, we will find you. I love that bit as well. I thought that was pretty cool. Thought it could have been acted a little bit better. I thought it was a little too over the top for me, but yeah, if there was one character who actually should have lived, I think it would be Wilson, because I think if Wilson had lived, it would have better suited the themes of the film a little bit, and have him have to come to terms with and consequences with his actions, which is why I love the '05 one so much. The '05 one, Carl Denham saying, "It's beauty killed the beast." Really, it isn't until Kong breaks free from his Broadway show does he realize, oh God, what have I done? He got so carried away with his own ambition and his own want to not only prove the producers wrong, but also prove himself. There's a lot more layers to it than necessarily with Wilson. And as a result, it takes this horrible tragedy to happen for Carl Denham to finally realize, God, what have I done? This is my fault, and you definitely see that in Jack Black's performance too. Jack Black, by the end of King Kong '05, his arc is complete during that final line of the movie, where he's like, "This was entirely my fault," and you can see it in his eyes, and I absolutely love that. Jack Black's such a good actor. I don't care what people say; he's such a good actor in that film. While in Kong 33, Carl Denham is a much more sympathetic character. In fact, I love the fact that in King Kong 33. Carl Denham says, fuck, when Andero gets captured, Carl Denham says, fuck the movie. We gotta get Ann back. And he's out there with a gun. He's out there tossing, those gas bombs. And I love that about that Carl Denham. That makes him a much more sympathetic character. And it's kind of funny. You'd think it'd be the other way around, that Carl Denham would become more sympathetic as he goes along. And no, the reverse ended up happening. Kong ends up becoming the more sympathetic character than Carl Denham. But that I've always found that kind of interesting, but I love both interpretations of Carl Denham, and I think Wilson is the weakest out of them all. But I still nevertheless like him. He's such a bad guy. You just can't, and he oozes villainy, and he did a great job. The actor did a great job there. Let's see. I respect your opinion, good sir. You make some valid points. And even though we are on the opposite sides of certain things, this is really enlightening stream conversation. Thank you, Leslie. I am glad you are enjoying. I really am. I'm really glad, because I really love King Kong, and I'm glad he's kind of getting revitalized a lot of ways thanks to Shout Factory. I'm glad that they were able to re-release that.